Hey, leaders and go-getters. If you're here, you're all about growth, pushing boundaries, stepping up, and making an impact. But when it comes to your career, are you leading the game or just playing along? Whether you're chasing a promotion, switching careers, or just want to stand out, it all starts with one thing: your executive summary. And guess what? We've got the Ultimate Executive Summary e-playbook, and it's 100% free. This step-by-step guide will take you from a blank page to a bold, standout executive summary that grabs attention and gets results. It's time to stop blending in and start owning your career story. Download your free copy now at leadthegame.org/free resources. And while you're there, check out 3 more powerful tools to help you take control of your career. Don't let your resume ride the bench. Get in the game. Head to leadthegame.org/free resources and grab your free e-playbook today. Now back to the show.
Welcome to a special edition of What's on Your Bookshelf with your host, Denise Russo.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf. My name is Denise Russo. I'm here with my friend, Dr. J.D. Pincus. He's the author of the book, The Emotionally Agile Brain, Mastering the 12 Emotional Needs That Drive Us. We are about halfway through this book in section number 3, which is Motives of the Social World. I'm looking forward to being here with you to have this conversation today, J.D.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. Always good to see you, Denise.
You as well. One of the things I really love about each of these chapters that I'm not sure if we talked about in a past episode is that you end the sections with some reflection questions. So I hope that before we finish today, we'll be able to share some of that with the listeners. And so if you don't have a copy of this book yet, I highly encourage you to go to Amazon, or are there other places as well, JD, that people can get the book?
Sure. You can get it, Barnes & Noble. You can get it at the publisher, Bloomsbury, bloomsbury.com. It's lots of places.
Awesome. And it's important to note that in our time together, we only have a very limited time to go through a lot of content. So I highly encourage you, if you're listening, to get a copy of the book so you can do a deep dive for yourself. I've often said on past episodes that one of the most profound things I learned from reading Coach Wooden by Pat Williams was that John Wooden learned at an early age from his father that one of the principles of success in life was to drink deeply from good books. It's my hope that we're able to share some of that together during our time today. I have definitely taken my own deep dive into these chapters, and there's no way we'll be able to get it all done in the short time that we have together. But I'm coveting this time and looking forward to discussing with you what it's like to not be alone in this world and to be able to express our emotions. You were sharing with me, JD, before we got started about the TV show Alone. So why don't we kick it off with that?
Sure. Yeah, no, that's great. It's a favorite example of mine because it's a really compelling show. It's basically, you have these survivalists who go off into the wilderness, usually near the Arctic Circle, as winter's approaching. And the goal is to just stay there and be relatively healthy as long as you possibly can. I think now they have a minimum of like 100 days you have to beat. And then it's like the person who's outlasts everyone after that point. The point is, though, these are really, skilled people. It's incredible what they can do in terms of building shelters, getting food, everything else. And what you see unfold every single season is the sort of hierarchy of needs unfolding. So the first need is for safety. There's some people who they get there and they freak out right away and they need to leave. They are feeling psychologically unsafe. They'll see a bear or whatever, and that's the end. Or they get injured and they have to go. They then can experience sort of autonomy. I can do this. I have the skills. I have the resources I need to build, a great shelter, to build fires, to be able to hunt and fish and do what I need to do. There's then a bit of sort of authenticity that comes in and immersion, like they really get into it. They're spending, full time every day doing this. they can achieve sort of potential, they can achieve success. But the thing that stops a lot of people, like they get to a certain point where, the sort of people who were shaky are gone, and now it's all like hardcore, very skilled people. The thing that happens next is a social problem. So the people who have really close relationships, and you can always tell this because they say there's a cash prize of like $500,000 if you win. The people who start off saying, I'm doing this for, my kids, I'm doing this for my wife, I'm doing this for my husband. They're the ones with like really close relationships. They're the ones who don't make it because they get to a certain point where they just miss people so much that sort of the aloneness of being alone, they become incredibly lonely, and they begin to say things like, I've sort of proven that I can do this. I'm not sure why I'm missing this time with my family. I'm missing this time with my parents or whatever it is. And I've proven what I need to prove, and I'm going to go home. The people who make it through that generally are people who don't have close relationships. They generally sort of live alone most of the time, or they're people who can subjugate that feeling and kind of say, what, I'm just going to block that out and I'm going to make it to the end. So I always think that's really interesting because it shows, sort of the socio-emotional. It's like, why do we put those words together as if social is emotional and emotional is social? It's because it's such a powerful set of drives. And it can prevent you from getting $500,000 pretty easily.
Wow. So you say in the book that the foundational need for us is basic human connection, and that's what is called inclusion. But it sounds almost like if you don't have those connections, you can strive for these things that you might consider success. But I wonder for those people that maybe do make it, how fulfilling is it if you don't have connection? Because you have in the hierarchy, I guess here, connection is comes after inclusion, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's an important point. It's like, yes, you may win the prize, but what have you won? And I have definitely gotten the sense from the people who are sort of not very well connected socially, who do win this game. When they win, it does feel there's something a little bit empty about it. When they check in on them later, like they'll talk about how, it drove them some more business, for their outdoor, supply or, guide service. But it's very kind of material oriented. And there's really not a lot about who they're sharing the success with. And in a sense, it's a little sad. It's sort of like they're sort of stunted. And in a sense, the people who gave up are probably living a much better life. So it's very bittersweet, I think.
You have in the book around how this hierarchy starts with inclusion, followed by connection, and then followed by being appreciated or esteemed. And I was really stuck here, JD, because I felt like as I was thinking through my past career journey, connection for me has always been critical. It is the one component that makes going to work not feel like work. And I don't think that I was ever really the type of person that sought out public displays of appreciation, which I guess there's certain personalities that will need that and some that don't. But where I struggled a little bit is understanding, why is connection not higher than esteem?
Right. And this is something that people get tripped up on all the time. And I think part of it is my fault through the use of the word recognition. I was trying to use a word that was generic enough to be able to encompass a lot of different things. Some other words that might have been considered were, affirmation, validation, respect, honor, that sort of thing. And the key point I make right in the beginning of that chapter about recognition is that anything that the word, unfortunately, reminds people of recognition programs, which are almost the exact opposite of what my intention is. Anyone who seeks recognition, that you're seeking that, Employee of the Month parking space or the Lucite trophy that says you're the star performer of the month, that is exactly the opposite of what I mean. What I mean is it's a natural consequence that you don't pursue intentionally. It's a natural consequence of good social behavior, of being a good team member, including other people, having caring relationships. And over many years of that and decades, people will accord you a certain respect and a certain, reverence around, you as a force and a person that's there for good. It's not something you get trophies for. And if you do get trophies for it, it cheapens it and diminishes it, frankly. So what I mean is sort of like becoming like the elder of the tribe. It's not something that you lobby for, it's something you grow into.
I love how you describe that, because I have, my kids have won, I don't know, numerous trophies for different things along the way. And they're all sitting in this dusty area on a shelf in the front of our house where the TVs are, where the TV's located. But in my office, the most coveted things that I have on my shelves are handwritten notes that I received from people that I care about. And when I look at them and I think about like decluttering my office space, those are the things that absolutely will never go, because there's something that is about the connection or the relationship I had with people that's worth far more than plastic trophy.
Yeah, that's something I definitely struggled with in my own career. I did want trophies and awards, and I got them. I got lots of them. I was on the cover of magazines. I was, and like what I discovered from that is that it feels good for a moment, and then it sort of feels embarrassing. It's not fulfilling. It's not what it's about. And you have to push through that and understand that is absolutely not what life is about.
I can't remember which award show it was, like some music award show, maybe it was the Grammys or American Music Awards or something like that. But often these same artists win all the awards all night long. And it does feel kind of diluted when they keep going up and they're like, well, I don't have any more speeches to say because I already thanked everybody. Yeah. And then you wonder, you go home with this big suitcase full of things, but how fulfilled really are you? And at the end of the day, we know from some of our past conversations together that the most successful people aren't finding their success in things. I continued since maybe 2 episodes ago to really dive deeply into thinking about in my own life how this dark horse theory impacts me. I think you even saw I wrote something about it on my LinkedIn recently, where I've been pondering about what things fill me up intrinsically and what things do I need to let go of, where there is this comparison to be the thief of joy, comparing myself or my career with others. And one of the things that struck me is that if you live your life without connection, but with comparison, you can become a very lonely person, even if you're around a lot of people.
Yeah. That's right. That's exactly right. And it brings up a point that Hannah Arendt, the philosopher, said about loneliness, that, that actually it was even, I think, around the same time. It was, I think, David Reisman, who wrote The Lonely Crowd in, I think, 1950. And he was sort of predicting that what we were doing as a society was basically ignoring our own internal standards and traditional standards and replacing them with external standards of basically social comparison, what you're talking about. And that leads people into this sort of cycle of loneliness, because you're thinking about your relationship with other people through this filter of material status. And that basically is, if somebody's doing better than you sort of find reasons to not like them or not want to spend time with them. And if you're doing better than someone else, it's sort of like you feel somehow superior to them. And it's a cycle that just ruins relationships. Hannah Arendt's point was a more political point. And she said that basically that kind of state of loneliness that Reisman talked about is something that basically paves the way for totalitarianism and authoritarianism. And it was, I can't believe she wrote this, decades and decades ago. It was probably 50 years ago or more. And it basically says that when people are lonely, they basically stop being able to trust what they hear. They become skeptical of everything. They become skeptical even of their own experience, their own history, to the point where someone else can come along and tell them, the reason you're miserable and lonely is because of this person or that group.
Mhm.
And that is very comforting to them. And people will grab onto it. And what we found in the research is about 25% of the population in Western societies is what I would consider dangerously lonely, like completely alone. And about 25% also believes these crazy conspiracy theories of all kinds. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think, it's like Hannah Arendt said, one leads to the other.
Well, and then you have the problem with social media, right? Where people spend all day long comparing themselves to what they see other people's little snippets saying. And you wonder how that person has the greatest life ever. Or I saw a post from a friend of mine who went to elementary school the other day, and she just said, stop complaining. Like, if you're out here and all you ever do is post about some complaints, like, get a life. I use it to, experience joy and looking at my friends' kids growing up, or to be able to express something that I've done with my family. But I was this last week moving my son back to college for his final year in his undergrad. And there were some things that we were doing together that they didn't warrant the attention of people that I don't really care about. We just were in the moment and enjoying that level that you have for intimacy and then connection and then appreciation. And we left these experiences hoping that we'll be able to capture those memories. I was with my mom the day after I got back, and we were trying to think about some things that we experienced when I was my son's age. And she remembered things I didn't remember, and I remembered some things that she didn't remember. But there was this affectionate love for these conversations of the past while we were living together in the present and hopefully dreaming for things in the future. And so I'm curious, when you think about these levels and what this chapter means about the social connections, where does grief live in this area?
Yeah, so grief is sort of the dark side, in a sense that if you lose a relationship, either through people kind of falling out or a death or whatever, it's the pain of the loss that this is such a big driver of people's behavior, and it's so important in terms of motivating people to do what they do, that a sort of loss of that, tearing apart of that relationship is extremely painful. And it's painful, like it actually in the brain, it's the same part, the insula, that lights up when you have physical pain. So it's no, it's not just a psychological thing. It's a real pain. It has real consequences. And you think back to all of the experiments, the Harlow experiments with the monkeys, and the unfortunate natural experiments that happened in the Romanian orphanages, and even what happens to prisoners in America who get put in solitary confinement. What they see is that over time, their brains physically shrink, like their hippocampus actually shrinks. And that is, you talk about like the pain of the loss of a relationship. I mean, that's being forced on them. And you see it actually causes physical changes in the brain. It basically changes how your memory works. It changes how your perception of self exists, your ability to connect to other people. So it's not a minor thing. So grief is a normal reaction. Hopefully it's something that is relatively temporary in terms of its intensity. I think a lot of people who've experienced grief, though, will tell you that it doesn't really ever completely go away. It's just sort of its character changes. And I think that's normal. I think that's part of the experiences of life. I guess to be completely free of grief would be you're sort of forgetting about that relationship entirely, which would not be a healthy thing. So
let's talk about this in terms of business, because the next part of the chapter talks about inclusion. And there's a lot of people experiencing what I would call grief when they lose their job. Or if they're the people that didn't lose their job, but they're losing someone they really valued that did lose their job, there's sort of almost like this sense for the people that were retained of feeling guilty that they didn't lose their job. And the people that lost their job miss the pieces of their work that they really loved, even if some of the work they didn't love. And that's really hard for people right now, because they not only are now having to pivot and look for a new job and reinvent themselves, but while also experiencing these deep emotions of loss.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, job loss could be very traumatic, depending on how it happens and how long you've been there and what your relationships are like. It reminds me of one of the statistics that I saw in the chapter that was, one of the big drivers of engagement, the biggest one, according to Gallup, is whether you have a best friend at work, right? And so if you have a best friend at work, you tend to be really engaged. You can imagine if you have a best friend at work and you laid off, or they do, that's really traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
As it turns out, only 20% of the workforce agrees with that statement, that I have a best friend at work. So even though it's like such a really important thing, it talks about the importance of the need for inclusion and making those connections and caring, that I'm surprised that more workplaces don't sort of foster that, and encourage that, instead of kind of, putting people sort of in competition with each other, because it does have real consequences. But if you lose that relationship, it's going to knock you back, because you've now not just lost your income and kind of taken a hit to your self-esteem, but now you've got to sort of deal with the loss of those relationships and try as best you can to kind of stay in touch with them. And there's often some awkwardness around that because of the survivor's guilt, basically, the people who are still there. And it can be rough. It can be very rough, because, you're sort of dealing with a lot all at once, just sort of dumped on your lap.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very upsetting. It hits a lot of buttons.
It's hard. It's hard. Years ago, I told somebody this just about an hour ago on another call I was on, but years ago, one of my still best friends from college had said to me, Denise, people come into your life for reasons and seasons. Some stay for a while, some don't, and you can't predict it, but you can enjoy the moments that you have. And I wish there was a way that we could help middle schoolers learn this, because that's where, the mean girls begin. And I recall, even for myself, there was a time when I was in elementary school that all the kids played at the playground, and all the kids played Little League or ice skating. I grew up in Western New York, so it was like the only two things to do: go to the playground, play baseball, and go ice skating. But it was all the kids. And then when you get to middle school, there becomes this separation, which is interesting because it's about inclusion. The cool kids wanted to stay together, the band kids stayed together, the cheerleaders stayed together. And I'll never forget, you're talking way more than 40 years ago for me. And I can remember it like it's today, that the kids that were in this cool kid club, they were the kids that were in chorus, which now in hindsight, I'm thinking, why was that the cool kids club? But anyways, I wasn't in chorus, I was in the band. And these kids were selected for this play. It was a musical play. It was like a Chinese musical. It was the coolest play that I can remember we ever did in school. But I wasn't in that club anymore. And I remember one day going to lunch, and this is in junior high school, and they were all sitting together. And that particular day, there was not an extra seat for me to sit. And I can remember the feeling. And I walked down this little hallway area to another table, and there was the table of these kids that nobody ever sat with. They were the Island of Misfit Toy kids. And I know you'll bring up an example about that in a minute here, but that was that table. And that particular day, I sat there. And what I found was that was actually kids that in elementary school I was friends with, that somehow when I got to middle school, there was this separation of groups. And I missed being with these people. And I just mentioned about the friend who said, stop complaining on the internet. That person was at that table that day that I sat next to. And now here, like I say, 40 years later, I'm still in touch with that person. And some of those other kids, I might see them here or there with what they post online, but nothing like a really deep and intense appreciation for the relationship. And so it's interesting to think that sometimes maybe you have to be excluded to be included. with others who were excluded and to be able to find that group you belong to. We talked about some of our favorite Christmas shows being right around this. So why don't I pass it over to you to talk about this analogy?
Sure. Yeah, I was pointing out the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, from 1964, and Rankin Bass. It's absolutely classic. Everybody loves the claymation, and it's fantastic. It's really one of my favorites. But when you look below the surface of that story, what is it really about? It's about a kid who has a birth defect that the parents try to conceal. When it's revealed, that basically the kid is excluded from everyone, but not just by peers, but at the sort of, direction of their coach. We're not going to play with him anymore, right? Right. That scene. And how he then goes off with the, Herbie the elf, who has also been basically kicked out of his group because he doesn't want to make toys. He wants to be a dentist. So they go off on their adventure, at the sort of danger, risk of their lives, really, but end up at this island of misfit toys where they realize that, there's a community for them also. So it kind of has a happy ending. The weird part of it is when they kind of go and look for Rudolph and bring him back because his, mutation is helpful to them in terms of what they need to get done. And suddenly he's sort of appreciated and honored as a valued member of the group. But it's only because he could provide something that they otherwise couldn't do. Not crazy about that detail, but I do love the idea that he kind of finds his group. And you see that hopefully in high schools and middle schools, that even when, the sort of cool kids kind of segregate themselves in a closed group, that there's still places for everybody, to find their group. And it doesn't have to be, it's sort of interesting too, in terms of social media. What they find on Facebook and Instagram is having a lot of connections is associated with sort of, better sort of social relations, right? But the more time you spend on those apps, that's associated with less, with lower emotional well-being. So it's like going and scrolling through what other people are doing. The sort of social comparison aspect of it is very toxic. And I remember both my kids have said that they, that one of the best things they ever did was to delete those apps, because it's like, they have very active social lives, but you don't need to be reminded of every single time somebody got together that that you weren't included. And that's basically what that does. It's sort of, it's like a exclusion, fear of missing out machine, that basically is incredibly compelling, especially in middle school, where everything is about your sort of, status and popularity. And what we see, though, is that actually using these apps is very, really, corrosive to your self-esteem.
I wonder if that has to do with this baseline piece of the intimacy part, because I think of it like, if I have a loved one who doesn't live where I live, I love seeing what they're doing and how they're living and the things they're experiencing. But I can see what you're saying as far as, well, what if it's someone you have a surface level relationship with, and then you see them doing really awesome things, and now you might be thinking in jealousy or envy around, well, why does that person get to do this or that or the other thing? And, oh, my life is so bad that now you compare yourself to their life. And so it seems like a double-edged sword, because if we are lonely, why are we isolating?
Right. Yeah, no, it's a good question. And the truth is, it's a paradox. It's like we have these like really like dangerous levels of loneliness in society. The Surgeon General wanted to appoint a minister for loneliness. I think they did that in the UK. It's a serious issue. I think the statistic I saw was that 75% of Americans, particularly in the suburbs, aren't friends with any of their neighbors. And more than half don't want to be. It's like, so we have this sort of crisis of loneliness and isolation, but there's also an unwillingness to break through, to kind of do the like semi uncomfortable things to kind of begin to form those relationships, actually have people over, for dinner or barbecue, attend group meetings of whatever you're interested in. All of those statistics are way down. Like, I think attendance of those kinds of social groups is like down by something like 60% over the last few years. Having people over to your house is down by like 35%. This was in Robert Putnam's Bowling Alone book. He kind of documents the sort of fraying of social connection in America. And yeah, it's the benefits are worth the discomfort of kind of re-engaging with people. But I guess it's just not easy for a lot of people.
I wonder if it's because we let ourselves get so busy, because you're no longer kind of like this 1960s family where, maybe the mom has a part-time job and she makes fresh baked cookies every day and homemade meals, and you sit on your front porch because you're not scared to not lock the door. Yeah, that was only one generation ago when we were young and growing up, to where anybody could walk in at any time. In 2009, my house was destroyed in a FEMA flood. And I didn't know my neighbors. I didn't. I was that person. But that experience brought everybody outside, because everything we owned had to be put on our front yards for dumpsters to take away. And that's how we met our neighbors. And there's a couple neighbors now that we still stay in touch with. And when I say that, like, we had to move because the houses were unlivable, and we didn't meet our neighbors till the day we had to evacuate. And it was sad. And we'd had this discussion together with the neighbors a few times around why did it take a disaster to come together? And yet here I'm sitting here talking to you right now and looking out my window and thinking, I don't know their name or their name or their name. My husband's the opposite. He's like Mr. Extrovert. He becomes friends with the Uber drivers. He becomes friends with people that are the checkout cashiers at the grocery store. So he knows everybody. But I get huddled up in front of this screen because most of my day is doing like what we're doing now. And then you do get tired at the end of the day, and you don't want to go out and have conversations. And I always joke with my kids, JD, like, I could be standing in line right up against the person in front of me, and inevitably somebody will be like, oh, excuse me, and have to cut through between me and the person in front of me. No matter where I am, it happens everywhere I go. Or I'll be at Disney World, I have no name tag on, I look like a tourist, and people come up to me and ask me questions like, do you know where this ride is, or where's the bathroom? And I always joke about it, just because I think it's funny that there must be some sort of flashing invisible light over my head that says, ask me questions, even if I have headphones on and my head is down.
That's probably a good thing. People are comfortable approaching it, which is great. That's you've got an advantage there. I think a lot of people don't have that, and I think it's definitely easier to kind of go with a sort of default setting, which is, I know who I know, and I'm not interested in meeting new people, and, being a little bit kind of, closed off. I think that's sort of become like a cultural thing, like that's sort of, the cool people do that. They're sort of, they've got their earbuds in, and they're looking at their screen, and they're focused, and they're not, like, nobody's talking to anybody anymore. And the other thing that Jonathan Haidt pointed out is that the sort of, fearful parenting of, like, having not having your kids out of your sight ever. And, he has this sort of thought experiment of, like, if you think back on, like, what some of the highlights of your childhood, parents were never there. It was always like time you spent alone. But something happened in the intervening years between social media and the sort of rise of, like, sort of scary television like Dateline and Predators and, America's Most Wanted, that all of a sudden the world seemed very dangerous, and that we felt much more comfortable having our kids locked up in their bedroom online than we did having them running through the neighborhood. And he basically documents just how damaging that's been.
You tell some really scary and staggering statistics in the book about loneliness. And I know we're almost out of time, so I want to try to get to some other parts here. But I think it's important to note this, because you may be listening and this is sounding like you. And so, JD, you talk about in the book about these analyses and research studies that say 70 different studies shared that people who are lonely have a 26% higher risk of dying at any given age, which rises to 32% if you live alone, and that if you have loneliness, your body feels these stressors. You have lack of control, lack of sleep, higher rates of anxiety, depression, substance abuse. Loneliness also is associated with physical ailments like heart disease, cancer, cognitive decline, premature death. Those should be warning signs that say, come out from behind your screen, go meet people, do things, even if it's scary.
Yeah, and do it even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's somewhat painful for you, it's worth it. I remember in terms of the statistics, like living alone used to be very rare in terms of like, a household composition type. Now it's the second largest type in the US. It's something like 28%. In the EU, it's 34%. In cities in the US, it's 40%. In Manhattan, it's 66%.
Mm.
2/3 of homes there have one person living in them. And yeah, like you said, 32% higher likelihood of dying at every age. And the reason that happens is that basically we go into like a self-destruct mode. We're social creatures. We sort of need other people to sort of thrive and be emotionally well. And without that, we begin to shut down, and the inflammation increases. Cancer can metastasize more easily. Immune functioning decreases. So the consequences are real and serious. And this is not a joking matter. It's not this actually is something people really need to do for their health.
You talk about this as well as we pivot into the next part of the book, which is about caring.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we just talk about that from the perspective of business, you mentioned that in loneliness, it has markers of absenteeism, loss of productivity, things of that sort. But as you pivot into talking about caring, which is around feeling that connection, I guess, you talk about how there are strong associations with things like feeling burnt out, being emotionally distant. If you have an emotionally distant manager and you don't feel cared for, or that you feel disconnected from your coworkers, or you feel like your employer is unconcerned about your own well-being. And so it almost seems as well that you may be good at something and you're going for a job that you're talented in, but if you're not surrounded by a culture of caring and a culture of people that resonate with your style, that it doesn't matter how much money you make or the title you have or the work you do. If you're not surrounded with these emotional, social pieces, you aren't going to not only be satisfied, but successful in your job.
Right, exactly. And I think that's probably one of the dimensions that differentiates different companies, cultures, maybe the most, is the ones where you feel like the employees feel like the place cares about them and has their best interests in mind, and ones that think that you're cogs in the machine and you're replaceable, and you're useful only as long as you're sort of a top performer. And I've worked in both places, and it's unmistakable, the difference. There's no question about it. And interestingly, you tend to get paid more at the ones that are more toxic, because they know that they're not keeping you around for long potentially, and that it's about burnout. It's about getting the most out of you and then sending you on your way. So yeah, I mean, it's a really serious issue. And if you want people to be engaged, you want people to be loyal, you want them to retain longer, to kind of actually become experts in the things they're supposed to be doing, you better show that you care about them. If you don't show that you care about them, they're only going to be half paying attention. They're going to be looking for the next opportunity the entire time, because they know you have no loyalty to them, and why should they have loyalty to you? So it's reciprocal, like the entire social domain. You have to give in order to receive. Mm-hmm. So employers really need to heed that lesson.
That actually goes into this last part, and I don't want to skip it before we're done for today. And it's about recognition. I had a client not long ago who was a stellar high potential performer, was being put into high potential leadership programs, was being given resources and opportunity, but they didn't feel appreciated and they didn't feel recognized for the work they were doing. And I remember having a conversation with my client around how they were considering literally leaving that role to go to another company for less pay because they felt like they would be appreciated and recognized better than in this company that, for all intents and purposes, was showing recognition through things like putting them through a program or giving them resources, but never just saying, hey, good job on such and such, so and so, and giving real feedback, not just saying good job, but with some tangible content.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of those things where it's done wrong much more often than it's done right, in terms of how we recognize people. I think the impact of just a sincere compliment, a sincere thank you, sincerity is the heart of it. It has to be that I know that that you're good at this and that you've done an amazing job and that I recognize that and I'm going to say that to you. It requires all of that. It can't be false praise. It can't be the sort of, participation trophies for everyone. That sort of, I remember this used to drive my kids crazy, that sort of excessive praise delivered in the teacher voice, that's sort of like, you did a great job. It's not real. They know it's not real. They have very advanced like BS detectors, and you're actually hurting their self-esteem when you do that, and you're also diminishing your credibility. So yeah, sincerity is everything. Like, it's got to be something that they really are good at, and not just in a relative sense. They're actually absolutely very good at it. They know they're really good at it. They can demonstrate that they're really good at it, and you're recognizing that. You're acknowledging that. And when those things come together, it's like magic. It's like then you can get people to do things that practically work for free, because those rewards are more important to people than whatever the salary and benefits. That stuff's obviously important, but it's sort of it's a baseline. It's like, oh, that's what got you in the door. But now what's going to keep you there is going to be, that sort of emotional rewards that are much more significant.
100%. You end this section by saying that it's a healthy thing that we admire those who create value for others, which encourages more people to do more of it, creating a virtuous cycle. There's a really great book by John Maxwell called Intentional Living, and it walks through ways that you can practice living with intention. And the first time I read the book, my kids, I think, were either just entering middle school or so. And we decided for one of the chapters that was about showing your intention to others, that we basically, there were two exercises. First, you show intention for yourself, then for those closest to you, and then for people you don't know, kind of a thing. And so I remember we did this exercise together where we wrote each other these love notes, but when we gave it to the person, we sat together. It was me and my two kids, or my two kids and I. We read the letters out loud to the person. And I remember that this is a long time ago that it happened, but I can remember that day where we were sitting, what it looked like, how we felt. There was just something about feeling valued, but the flip side was sharing the value and watching the person that you love so much, embracing what you say, think, and do for them is just magic. I'm always the person that loves to buy all the Christmas presents more so than get them, and anticipating how fun it'll be to watch people open presents. I take a lot of care into things like that and what I buy. And not that you can buy somebody's love, but it's about that feeling you get when you know that you've brought joy to someone. And so if we feel this or know this about this social section on emotions, then why are we not giving more of ourselves away?
Yeah, I mean, it's an excellent question, and it's the key to growth. Ultimately, that's the sort of movement across this framework, going from the self to the material to the social, and the social to the spiritual. It all has to do with caring less about your needs and more focus on the world around you, the other people in it, and then the principle. And I think that John Maxwell comment is exactly on point. It's sort of going from, your focus on you, your focus on other people that you know, to sort of people you don't know. And that's sort of taking it from kin, basically, and relationships you have to the principle of it. And that is the sort of evolution that, unfortunately not enough people go through. A lot of people get stuck at me, me and my material objects. But every philosopher, worth his salt, and every, psychologist, basically in some way or other makes this point that it's about sort of decentering. It's sort of becoming less about me and more about, the world, the people, the animals, and the principle.
There's this great group called Switchfoot. It's sort of like a rock band. They're a crossover band. And there's the lyrics to one of their songs that basically says, we were meant to live for so much more, but we lost ourselves. And next week, or next time we get together, we're going to be talking about the motives of the spiritual world and this thing that's beyond ourselves. So why don't you give us a little sneak peek into what people will experience when they're with us the next time?
Sure. So it's sort of where we've been going, right? It's this decentering process that now moves you out of the social domain, which is all about, relationships with people, and showing care for them and having good relations with them and keeping those relationships thriving and then being seen as a good person as a result of that. Now we're getting into the principle of it. So now it's like the big difference I like to emphasize is we're talking about strangers now. We're talking about how do you feel about how strangers are treated? And that's where justice comes in, ethics, and purpose. That it's now no longer about me. It's not even about people I know. It's not even about my group anymore. Now we're talking about the principle. So are people being treated fairly? Are animals being treated fairly? Is our planet being treated fairly? Are we treating ourselves fairly? All of those things. That's sort of the justice piece of it. Is there equity? Once we have equity, once we have a basically fair system, we can start to think about ethics. And ethics basically has to do with restraining self-interest. So what's unethical? Unethical practices of a business, for instance, would be exaggerating claims about what their product can do, hiding the real pricing and making it difficult to compare. These are all things that companies do in order to basically protect their self-interest at the expense of the consumer. So that's just a way of kind of thinking about it in that commercial sense. Of course, governments can be unethical. Any kind of institution can be unethical. Any kind of person can be unethical or ethical. And then once we have the sort of two layers already set, like we have a basically fair system, we're behaving we're in a system that basically we think is generally ethical. That's our first opportunity to start thinking about our higher purpose. And it's a point I always like to come back to when people say, well, I want to define my purpose now, even though I'm aware that I'm in an unjust system that's unethical. And I will make the point that every theologian ever has made, which is that there is no going to your higher purpose until you've dealt with the parts of your life that are unjust and unethical. That it's just an empty gesture otherwise. And every one of the prophets in the Old Testament has said this, and everyone since that time, it's in the New Testament as well. And it's ubiquitous in every theologian. Martin Luther King said it, Thomas Aquinas said it, Maimonides said it. It's you cannot get to that transcendent, getting close to God. God doesn't want you close to him or her unless you have already done the work. You've already addressed the injustice and the lack of ethics. Once you've done those things, you've sort of done the spiritual preparation for that transcendent purpose. So that's why I connect those things together. And there's plenty of traditions that make that argument. So I don't feel so alone making it.
Well, and this book is about mastering the 12 emotional needs that drive us. I don't know if I'm going to go away from this being able to feel like I've mastered them, but I certainly feel like so far I'm evolving through them. JD, thank you so much for the value that you give to us each episode, for this book that you've written with so much care and compassion and concern for the emotionally agile brain. It's always wonderful to be here with you. Friends, get this book, The Emotionally Agile Brain by Dr. JD Pincus. You can get it wherever you like to purchase your books online. And we hope that you'll join us again next week for another episode of What's on Your Bookshelf.